नमस्कार, स्वागत है आपका स्वराज एक्सप्रेस में। मैं हूं नीलू व्यास। कोरोना के चलते लॉकडाउन की घोषणा के पहले से ही देश की अर्थव्यवस्था चरमराई हुई है। ऐसे में कोरोना के संक्रमण से कम खौफ रोजी रोटी को लेकर नहीं है। लॉकडाउन के बाद जिस तरह से पलायन का खौफनाक मंजर दिख रहा है, उससे लोगों को 1947 के बंटवारे का दृश्य याद आ गया। भारत सरकार ने 1.7 लाख करोड़ के पैकेज की घोषणा की है, लेकिन बड़ा सवाल ये है कि क्या आर्थिक पैकेज वास्तव में मुद्दों को हल कर सकता है या नहीं। ऐसे में देश के सामाजिक आर्थिक ताने बाने का क्या होगा, यही बड़ा सवाल है। डर ये भी है कि ये तालाबंदी न जाने कब तक चलेगी और इसके असर के अंत तक कैसी तबाही मचेगी। इस मुद्दे पर आज हमारे साथ चर्चा करने के लिए मौजूद हैं जाने माने अर्थशास्त्री जान ड्रेज। जान ड्रेज, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है स्वराज एक्सप्रेस न्यूज़ चैनल पर। और सारे व्यूअर्स को मैं ये भी बता दूं, जान ड्रेज ने बहुत ज़्यादा काम किया है पीडीएस पर, फैमिन पर, और यूपीए की सरकार में काफ़ी बड़े रोल पर जान ड्रेज थे। तो आपका एक बार फिर से स्वागत है। जान, माय फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन टू यू इज़ that the Indian economy was already sputtering before the lockdown was announced. How big do you think is the setback currently for the government, and could it have been better planned?
Well, I think it could certainly have been better planned, and of course it's always quiet after the event.
Right.
But what is unforgivable, I think, is to have announced such a drastic lockdown with no sign of any preparations for relief measures. I mean, it was obvious that if you ask everyone to stay in their homes for 21 days, there would be huge numbers of people who will be in deep trouble, particularly the casual laborers and the migrant workers. So had the government made any preparation for these people, I'm sure there would have been a hint of it in the announcement of the Prime Minister, but there was none. So basically it was a kind of afterthought. Right. And you know, it's not like demonetization where by nature there has to be an element of surprise. I mean, devaluation also requires an element of surprise, but this is a case where surprise is not required.
Right,
and
but
even if you...
John,
Sorry?
if I could just interrupt you for a few seconds. You said that it wasn't demonetization and the surprise element was not here. But there was a sense of urgency because...
No, I'm sorry. Let me clarify. I was saying that in the case of demonetization, by nature, you have to have an element of surprise. But in this case, this is not required.
Okay.
So why this surprise announcement without preparation? And even if you argue that there was a need for an element of surprise to prevent migrant workers from rushing to their homes, which I would not agree with. But even if you agree with that, you could still have had some basic preparation in the form of relief measures. I mean, not to anticipate that. I think that is something that is going to be very difficult to forgive.
But Jean, do you think that it's a moral call which the government took, because the government says that it was completely helpless and it was just trying to contain the infection as much as possible, and that is why Prime Minister Narendra Modi all of a sudden in his address to the nation had to announce a lockdown. So does that explanation hold water?
Neelu, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that the lockdown was necessarily wrong. Okay. You know, if the government was helpless in the sense that it had to do a lockdown, even then there was an obvious need to anticipate the hardship that it would create for people and make at least some basic relief preparations. I mean, anyone would have been able to see that. I think the problem is that this government is so absorbed in taking policy decisions in the Prime Minister's office with a small group of corporate consultants who don't really know much about the ground realities. That is how this kind of thing happens.
But as far as the entire announcement of lockdown is concerned, of course, you are saying that the preparation and the planning could have been better. What are those 2-3 things which actually the government should have maybe taken those steps immediately before addressing the nation?
I think the main preparation was, of course, a substantial relief package ready in advance. I mean, obviously, this relief package seems to have been put together in a hurry in the 2 or 3 days that followed the announcement. I mean, that should have been thought about in advance. I don't think it's being wise after the event to point that out. And then, of course, the other thing is to think in advance about the migrant workers. That would not have been that easy, of course, because it was a kind of lose-lose situation. I mean, if you allow them time to go home, there would have been a massive rush and they would have carried the virus all over the place. If you don't allow them to go home, then now they are creating this crisis. I would say, at the minimum, there should have been some measures to help them to stay in place if they had to stay in place. Right. And there are facilities that can be used at short notice for that purpose. For example, all the schools and colleges are closed now. Right. So they could have been used to provide decent shelter to a large number, perhaps not all migrant workers, but at least a large number of them. The numbers are huge. We don't even know exactly how many of them are stranded. But according to the Census of India of 2011, there's something like 20 million people who at any point of time are working at a place other than their normal residence and have been there for less than a year. So that gives you an idea of the order of magnitude, something like 20 million people. Right. Of course, it's seasonal, so it could have been more or less at that particular point of time. But that's the kind of order of magnitude that you're talking about. So the numbers are huge. I'm not saying that it would have been easy at all to make provisions for all of them in advance, but there could have at least been some sign
right.
of concern for them and an effort to provide facilities to some of them.
Right. But if I were to understand correctly from what you're saying, Jean, are we to assume that the government did not really understand the scale of the problem? If you talk about the relief measures, of course, that is one point. Then second point is the way we've seen the mass exodus of the migrant laborers. Is it something that the government wouldn't have really ever thought of?
Well, the hardship that is being caused to people, that is something that really was very easy to anticipate. I don't think you remember this, but I wrote about this before the lockdown. I warned that, if that was before there was an announcement of 21-day lockdown.
Right.
But things were moving in that direction.
I did read your article, yes.
And I wrote,
yeah.
Sorry?
No, I said I did read your article. You go ahead. Go ahead with your answer,
yes.
please.
So it was not at all difficult to anticipate. So not anticipating that is, I think, unforgivable. Migrant work is a little bit less obvious because the migrant workers, there is no data and they are quite invisible to the middle class. They travel in different trains, they work in the shadows, there are no statistics, they are not registered. So you can see that not many people saw that coming.
Right.
But when you are preparing for something like this, and there was time to prepare, let me say that again, then I think that you have a chance to think about these matters.
Right. But the kind of economic relief package which recently was announced by Nirmala Sitharaman of 1.7 lakh crore. Now, is that really enough when you break it down to certain specifics, like say for example, the wages, merely 500 rupees amount which goes to the Jan Dhan accounts of the laborers. Is it really enough to sustain them?
No, I think it's obviously not enough. First of all, I don't think it's 1.7 lakh crore because there's a certain amount of padding and creative accounting in that figure.
Okay.
For example, the finance minister has counted some measures that had already been announced and budgeted for as part of this relief package, for example, the first installment of PM Kisan. And she also counted the small increase in Narega wages, which was just a routine annual exercise to take inflation into account. She counted that as a relief measure. And then she counts 40,000 crores to release some excess stocks, when in fact the government is going to save money by releasing excess stocks. It's just an accounting anomaly for which she is not responsible. That the food subsidy is counted at the point where the stocks are released. So it shouldn't really be like that. But anyway, the fact is that 40,000 crores are being counted for something that actually doesn't cost anything. So when you discount all this, you're much closer to 1 lakh crore than 1.7 lakh crore.
So are you?
And just to come to answer your question now, that translates into people getting, instead of 5 kilos of grain per month per person, 10 kilos if they are lucky to have a ration card, which of course is the case for a lot of people, but not everyone. And if you don't have a ration card, then you get 500 rupees a month if you have a Jan Dhan account. If you have a ration card, you also get that, of course. But it's not at all enough to feed a family of normal size. And also, and this is very important, there was nothing in that package for emergency measures for people who fall through the cracks, including these millions of migrant workers, because there are always people who fall through the cracks of the normal social security measures. Absolutely. Like NREGA and PM Kisan and the ration system and so on. Right. So you need, in a situation like this, you need emergency facilities so that those who are at risk of hunger have somewhere to go, of somebody to appeal to, so that they can be fed immediately without conditions, without having to show any documents. And that is what is very urgent right now, not after the lockdown, right now, in the next few days and before the end of the lockdown. And nothing was provided for that in the relief package. So I would say right now, on the first thing to add to the relief package is an immediate release of millions of tons of food to the states, so that they can put in place things like relief kitchens and emergency food distribution points.
Right. But looking at the fact that on the ground, the things don't look very, very easy, because despite all the announcements which have come in from Nirmala Sitharaman, there are a few problems, like you would have bank accounts, but then the people can't walk up to the banks and withdraw money. Then obviously a lot of other things are there on the ground which don't appear as easy as it's been made in the announcement. So what are those practical problems which you see on the ground? And say, for instance, another instance I would like to give it to you is the fact that many of the migrant laborers, they are still not registered. They are part of that unorganized sector, and if they aren't registered with the state governments, so how do they avail the benefits? So these are all the questions for which we don't find any answers at all.
Right. So I think that there are different sets of issues for food relief and cash relief. Food relief is going to work mainly through the public distribution system. The public distribution system is in place in all the states, and it already delivers food rations to about 2/3 of the population every month. Right. So the system is in place. It's a matter of expanding the scale and making sure that the system doesn't break down, because obviously the PDS is going to be under stress at a time when the entire economy is more or less at a standstill. But I think it can be done with enough vigilance. What worries me more right now is the system of cash disbursement, because it's very well to say that you're going to send cash to people's bank accounts. That can be done quite fast. Right. But the issue is, how are they going to get that cash? Now, you said that they are not able to go to the bank right now, and that is correct. But what we have to also anticipate is that once the lockdown is relaxed, hopefully in 2 weeks' time, there is likely to be a huge rush to the banks. Not only the people who are getting cash relief, but other people also. Everyone is going to want to withdraw cash from their bank accounts. Now, in the urban areas, the banks may still be able to cope because there are ATMs, and the density of bank branches is quite large. But don't forget that in the rural areas, and especially in the poorer states which are more vulnerable to hunger, there are entire blocks with a population of, let's say, 1 lakh people, which have only one bank branch. Right. And if everyone rushes to the bank, now, of course, in principle, in normal times, they can also go to a so-called business correspondent, a kind of extension counter of the bank. Right. But those business correspondents depend entirely on biometric authentication to function.
So they also
and that cannot be allowed now because sorry?
The business correspondents also then wouldn't be functioning so easily.
I think they will have to be banned, because they are a health hazard right now. They will have the transmission of the virus. So if people rush to the bank, there's going to be a big jam, like we have seen in the days of demonetization. And don't forget also that the bank employees, as it is, are already terrified of the public because they're afraid of infection. So if crowds of people come to the bank, and the bank employees, will perhaps shut the bank or run away or whatever, they will certainly not be able to service people. Right. So obviously there's no point sending cash if people can't get it out. So some new payment systems may have to be put in place on an emergency basis, and the government must think about this now. This is the time to plan for that. Otherwise, in 2 weeks' time, you are going to have another crisis like we are seeing today with the migrant workers.
Absolutely. In fact, आपने बिल्कुल ठीक कहा जान कि इस समय जो हमारे देश का जो इमरजेंसी रिस्पांस सिस्टम है जिससे कि इमीडिएट रिलीफ लोगों को मिले, वो चीज़ें हमें धरातल पर नज़र नहीं आ रही हैं। इस समय ज़रूरत है कि ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा लेवल पर विजिलेंस की ज़रूरत है, सरकार को विजिलेंट रहना है, जितने बेनिफिट्स अनाउंस किए गए हैं उसको ये देखना है कि लोगों तक वो कैसे पहुँचे, और ये एक बड़ी चुनौती है। We were just a short while back, we were talking about how the systems are under pressure. There is a complete lack of emergency response systems. But it's a total lack of preparedness, but for which the government is not ready to admit this fact. If you look at the affidavit which has been submitted by the government in the Supreme Court, it very clearly says that they followed all the travel advisories, they alerted the health officials much in advance, but then the situation on the ground is just turning worse day by day. So at the policy level, do you think that the disaster response team, or rather the government as a whole entity, has actually thought about a term called epidemic preparedness?
Neelu, just to correct something that you said, I think that many state governments now are actively trying to put in place emergency relief. Right. Kerala had already shown the way.
They are, absolutely. I'm talking about the central government, John.
Yeah, so I think it is the central government that must support them, because without support from the central government, the state governments cannot do much more than the minimum on their own. That is why I was emphasizing earlier the urgent need to first of all release more food stocks to the state governments, not just the PDS allocations, something over and above that. Right. Without any strings attached, so that the state governments can expand the relief measures. I think many state governments now are really at it, including this state here in Jharkhand. I'm sure they can do better, but to say that they are not doing anything would not be correct. Right. I think the central government has to give more resources and have a greater sense of urgency and think ahead of the delivery problems that are going to happen both with the food system and with the cash support system.
Right. But as far as the other factors are concerned, say for example the fiscal deficit, now the government says that it's assisting the states, but when you talk about the individual fiscal targets of this various states, they'll be appearing to be shooting out of the roof. So at this point of time, how and where does the central government come into assistance immediately?
You see, the state governments cannot spend beyond the point of their own steam. I mean, they have some constraints. The government can expand its spending. For one thing, it can print money, which is not the case of the state governments.
Right.
And I think it's important to recognize that the ordinary rules of fiscal prudence don't really apply in this kind of situation. When the lockdown is lifted, or at least relaxed, hopefully in a couple of weeks' time, you will be in a situation with enormous excess capacity in the country and a lack of purchasing power among many people. And that's a characteristic situation where there's a need for a fiscal stimulus to revive the economy, and where the stimulus, in a sense, hopefully will pay for itself, because it will generate more GDP and then more tax revenue.
Right.
And so we should not be bound by the ordinary rules of fiscal prudence. And most of the affluent countries are showing that. I mean, you know, Trump is not a socialist by any means, but he's launching now enormously expensive relief packages or stimulus packages that dwarf anything that India is contemplating, even taking into account the difference in GDP.
Right.
So I think we are lagging behind, and we have to be more ambitious. Though I would say that it's not a matter of mainly of economic stimulus right now. Right now, it's mainly a matter of saving lives and providing relief and avoiding a humanitarian disaster. Absolutely. And for that, again, you cannot apply the normal rules of fiscal prudence.
Right. But Jean, you've just read about how there is a PM National Relief Fund, and there is another parallel charitable trust which has been created in the name of PM Cares. There are a lot of questions being raised as to what was the need to bring out another charitable trust. What is your view on this, particularly given the fact that the way Shashi Tharoor, Sitaram Yechuri, all these leaders have been raising questions that all is not well as far as the funding structure is concerned? It seems to be opaque, lack of transparency.
It's not really my priority to go into the motives for that fund and then the politics of it and so on and so forth. I would say that any effort to expand the resources, collect donations and so on from charitable institutions or persons,
right.
All this obviously at this particular point of time has to be welcome, but it's only a drop in the ocean. What is needed is big resources from the central government. That's the only institution that can provide the resources on the required scale. So I'm not particularly interested myself right now in that relief fund. I'm interested in what the central government is going to provide, both in terms of extra food stocks and extra financial resources.
Right. But what does your experience say? Looking at the intensity of the problem, do you think that the lockdown will be lifted by 15th April?
I'm not so optimistic because I don't see how this lockdown is going to go very far in containing the spread of this virus when there are so many people moving around and living in crowded conditions who cannot, even with the best of intention, observe social distancing and other precautions.
Right.
So it may slow down the spread, and possibly it is justified. I don't really know. I'm not qualified to say.
Right.
But hearing the professional discussions on this, I have a feeling that there will be a lot of arguments from them for extending the lockdown, or perhaps for relaxing it temporarily and then having more localized lockdowns off and on later. But even that could make the situation extremely difficult. So it looks to me like we are heading for a very serious situation, both in terms of humanitarian crisis and health crisis. Here in Jharkhand, the preparedness of the health system is really minimal, if not zero.
Yeah.
The first case was recognized yesterday in Ranchi, and the health services could very quickly overwhelmed. And when you see the speed of progression of the virus, obviously you're very worried. So I think we have to come to terms that we are heading towards an extremely serious situation, at the same time as hoping that it will not last for too long, and doing our best to make sure that the problems are addressed.
Absolutely. And what you're hinting at it is that we might be heading into a bigger crisis with each passing day. So do you think that the present government can announce an emergency lockdown, an emergency kind of a situation, though officially they've not used this term at all?
Look, again, I am not a professional public health expert, but I would say one thing. I would say that these policies cannot be made by just counting, or rather speculating about the number of deaths. We cannot say, oh, we need the lockdown because there will be fewer deaths by doing that.
Right.
Fewer deaths from hunger and destitution than there would be from the virus if we lift the lockdown. I think that we have to also think about the principles and try to get through this with some basic dignity and solidarity, and try to involve people constructively in trying to do something for themselves and from others, for themselves and for others.
Right.
And speaking for myself, I would say if there are a few more deaths, we cannot let people starve.
Right.
For me, that is a non-negotiable. If people are starving now, and they are, and there will be more tomorrow, we have to do something about them. If it means that the virus will spread a little faster and more people will die of the virus, then I would say, look, we have to take that into account, but we cannot be driven by the death statistics.
Right. So that's a catch-22 situation for the government.
Yes.
At one point of time, it has to save the lives. On the other, they have to feed the people. Thank you so much, Jean Dreze, for joining us on the program. लेकिन जैसा जॉन ने कहा कि एक बहुत बड़ी चुनौती इस समय सरकार के सामने है, बहुत सारे कदम भी सरकार उठा रही है, लेकिन जो इमेंसिटी है, जो पूरे स्केल है जो इस प्रॉब्लम का, उसको देखते हुए जितने भी एक्सपर्ट्स हैं वो कह रहे हैं कि अभी बहुत ज़्यादा इमरजेंसी रिस्पॉन्स सिस्टम्स को एक्टिवेट करने की ज़रूरत है. तो सारी निगाहें इस पर टिकी होंगी. अभी देखना होगा कि सरकार इसको लेकर क्या करती है, और धरातल पर जहां तक सवाल है, लोगों तक ये सारे बेनिफिट्स कैसे पहुंचते हैं, यही एक बड़ा सवाल है. तो मेरी तरफ से इतना ही. आप बने रहिए स्वराज एक्सप्रेस पर. थैंक यू.